Hi guys, I'm Lauren. Welcome to my channel. It's so good to see you today. Thank you guys for popping in. Oh my goodness. Okay, so today we are building a terrarium. Full disclosure, I built this a couple of days ago and I was very sick and I couldn't talk, and I am having to refilm the intro and refilm the outro, and I am doing a voiceover for the terrarium. Still kind of sick, not 110%. You will definitely be able to hear it in my voice. Hopefully it doesn't sound too bad though. I'm fingers crossed. But this has given me a unique opportunity to make this more of a tutorial piece. So anyway, I've had several people ask me for a full terrarium tutorial. I have built 10 to 15 of them now, depending on if you count the smaller ones or not. So this is kind of my go-to method. This is the method that I have seen the most. And this is kind of my tutorial for it. Anyway, let's build a terrarium.
Alright guys, so the first step is always going to be clean the tank. Whatever kind of terrarium you are building, you always want to make sure that it is 100% clean. There are people that like to use a bleach and water mixture. I personally prefer to just clean it with good old-fashioned soap and water, rinse it out, and then sanitize it with isopropyl alcohol. I have also been told for fish tanks in particular, the vinegar water mixture is really great. Step number 2, you're going to want to add your layers. Layer 1 is always going to be your drainage layer or your rock layer. For a bigger terrarium like this, it can be any type of rocks. Personally, I like to use perlite just because it's water retentive and it won't hold the water a whole lot, but it is slightly water retentive. Sometimes you can also find it with fertilizer. For smaller terrariums, you might want to find something like a coarse sand. It just depends on what's going to work best for you. After you add your drainage layer in, you do want to kind of flatten it, make sure that it's hitting all the sides, and make sure it's hitting all of the areas of your tank. This layer is very important because it's going to hold any excess water. When water drains down, it's going to be in there, and you don't want it to be uneven, messing up the rest of the layers. Next up is our filtration layer. I use horticultural charcoal. I just sprinkle it on over top. It doesn't have to be a very thick layer. It's about half of the layer of perlite underneath. I actually ran out of charcoal, so you're not going to see what it's supposed to look like here, and I'm going to make do with that. The third layer is the separation and the mesh layer. I personally like to use sphagnum moss, but it does break down over time. So if you want something a bit more permanent, you can use an actual physical mesh. There are so many different things for people to use. It just depends. Some people use plastic, some people use metal, some people use various forms of moss, sphagnum moss. It just depends. When I use the sphagnum moss, I do push down as hard as I can to kind of flatten it. This layer is going to be separating from our layer 4, the soil layer, or the plant media layer. I normally don't like to use soil or peat moss, but I will chop up the sphagnum moss for whatever mixture because it's going to be helping spread the water out throughout the media properly. And then also, if you're using sphagnum moss, it's better to chop it because you can see that some of the parts will remain dry and not fully saturated if you don't chop it. I have made sure that all the pieces are fully saturated. I'm going to be wringing them out and switching them over to my soil mixture bucket here. So that's what I have done, and you can see better how fine it is. It's very soft, it's very light, very fluffy. It's going to keep aeration in there, but it's going to hold moisture as well. So that's going to help prevent rot in our terrarium, which I really, really love. But it's also going to help spread that moisture around and make the humidity even. Another moisture retentive substance I like to use for my mixes is repti bark or a fir bark. This has been cleaned and treated. It's safe for plants and animals. You don't have to worry about a whole bunch of extra yuck in it. It's also fairly inexpensive and doesn't have a bunch of big chunks. They're all fairly even for the most part. Instead of soil, I prefer to use earthworm castings instead of like a peat-based potting soil. Unfortunately for me, I am out of earthworm castings for the most part. I only have a little bit. It's a natural fertilizer that is very moisture retentive, so I really enjoy using it, and it's something that won't burn any sensitive plants like ferns or calathea if I put them in there. I also like to mix in organic charcoal because it can soak up moisture as well. It can also retain like any kind of plant food I put in there and slow release it over time. Perlite is an okay substitute. It will do these things as well. This is enriched with Miracle-Gro plant food, so if you do buy it, keep that in mind. Luckily for you though, I am running out of worm castings. I didn't have that much, so I'm going to use soil mixture, which is what a lot of people like to use. So you can kind of see how I have divvied it up. I used about the same amount of soil as I did sphagnum. I kind of evened that up. And then I put about half that amount of bark and half that amount of perlite and as much worm castings as I possibly could. But if you want to use worm castings, just use it in place of the soil mixture. And that makes our fourth layer. I try to make it an inch or two. It doesn't have to be super thick. This is where you shape the terrarium how you want. If you want a hill in the back, you're going to use that soil. If you want hills to the side, soil. It's just an inexpensive way to really get what you want where you can plant the plants, which is the next step, picking all of our plants. I have a whole bunch of various kinds of peperomia, and I will list the names here for you. And play some awesome music, and you can decide which ones you like. You can plant any kind of plants that you want in a terrarium, provided they like a high humidity environment. This particular one is going to be just peperomia. I have done others, and you can take a look at my terrarium playlist to see what other terrariums I've planted and what other plants I have used. Eventually I will make a video for just terrarium plants for you, but I don't have that now. So now that we have all of our plants chosen, we have to decide where they're going to go, and we're going to plant the bigger ones. So for example, this is my biggest peperomia, this Peperomia elongata. I know I want it over in this corner, so I'm going to place it there, but not plant it yet. And then this Peperomia argyrius, or watermelon peperomia, is also going to go on the other side to kind of contrast. And it is totally okay to move things around in this step. You're not permanently placing anything, you're just kind of getting an idea for how all of these little elements are going to look together. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Also remember, these plants will grow and they will evolve. So keep how they're going to be growing in mind when you're choosing where to put them. Next up, you want to add your other elements. For me personally, I like to use moss. It's something I've recently started using. I gather my moss in my yard. I think a lot of other people like to use moss as well, and it's not always accessible to order online. I also gathered some rocks while I was outside. I really want to use them in my terrarium, and you always want to make sure that you sterilize anything you get from the outside. That way you're not introducing yucky into your terrariums. I do always recommend boiling because unlike freezing, it will kill molds, mildews, fungi, bacteria, everything. You cannot freeze living things like moss though, so there are several other ways to do it. They contain a very, very complex micro ecosystem. Some people like to sterilize them. They'll use like a water and bleach mixture. I personally don't prefer to do that. It just depends on what you're really concerned about. I gather from my yard. I'm not very concerned except for pests, honestly. So what I'll do is I'll go and I'll gently rinse it and wring it out and just use some cold water. If it breaks a little bit, it's totally okay. It's not that big a deal. It will grow back. I want to get out any big chunks of the substrate from outside. I want to make sure that any pests that are in there are removed. There are like some good little springtails and worms and those kind of things, but I don't want them. I want to introduce them into the tank. I don't want them to be hitchhikers along with potential damaging pests. So after I'm done wringing them out, I put them in this strainer and I just continue to wring them out. When the water gets too dirty, I will dump it out and renew it. After it has been rinsed out in the water, I will go and I will run it with a hose just over it. I will do this for 4 or 5 minutes until I feel comfortable that everything coming out of it is clear. I don't want any yucky pests or bugs or anything. And after I'm done rinsing it out, I will remove it from the strainer, and I'll make sure to take a look at it and make sure to feel it and make sure that it seems good and clean, and that way it's safe for the terrarium. We can also quarantine it for 30 days. A lot of people will do that so that they can pay attention to any pests or issues that pop up. I don't have that kind of time today or patience, so we're moving on to the next step, which is choosing any extra accoutrement that we want in our terrarium. Today I'm choosing this broken terracotta pot, and I think you're going to be excited with what I do with it. You can use a whole bunch of different things though. You can use broken pots, you can use whole pots, you can put terrariums inside other terrariums. There's a lot of options. This broken terracotta pot just super excited me because it's very moisture retentive, but it will also wick away the moisture, which means that it's going to be a perfect thing for moss to stick to. And I love that. I am going to be making a multi-layer over here. This is part of step 5, where we actually start layering in all of our objects and planting the plants in here. You can see that I added one layer, added a broken piece, added another layer of soil, added a broken piece, and I planted the plant inside this broken pot. I'm trying to make it kind of like steps or a hillside, depending, not too perfect, and then I can plant other plants in here as well and add extra layers and dimension. Let me remove these so that way you can see exactly what's going on over here. I know people have seen these with succulents where they layer them and make kind of looking stairs and whatnot, but I'm going for more of a hillside look. This other part of the broken pot I want to put on this other side, and I want to kind of, I don't know, make kind of like a broken log sort of. I will be placing moss over it later. It just depends on what you want to do. I am making sure when I do press it down, I'm only going through the soil layer, not our other 2 layers, or not our other 3 layers. The one that I want to plant back here is this peperomia argyrius. I am trying to plant the taller plants in the back, especially if they have interesting leaves that are going to be standing out. And then I am kind of backfilling this and making a little bit of a hill, so that way this plant isn't trying to survive with just little roots hanging out in the middle of nowhere. Speaking of roots, I am not messing with peperomia roots. I am pulling them out and placing them. I am not messing up the roots at the bottom. After you start placing some of the bigger plants, it's time to kind of step back and see where you're going to place your smaller plants and if you still like the arrangement that you originally had. I really like how this has a completely different texture than any of the other ones in there, and I think being in the back, that white variegation is going to pop amongst all of the green I'm going to place in there. There are so many different kinds of plants, and as you plant up your terrarium, you do want to keep in mind what you're placing where. I know that this Scandens mint is going to grow upright, and then it's going to vine out, So I'm giving it something to help it stay upright, and then something for it to vine out over and around later. Now that I've gotten some of the more rooted plants in there, I have a few other elements I would like to add. These rocks in particular. I knew I wanted to place this big rock in the middle to kind of balance out the big pieces on either side. This adds a little bit of evenness and depth and dimension. I'm multi-layering with the front, the middle, and the back. And then I'm kind of placing this one in front to kind of give it more layers so that it's just not one lone rock. This one had a lot of interesting texture. I really want to highlight that later. And there we have it, our extra elements. Now we've got to add more plants and some moss. I think we're going to do the moss layer next. It is totally preference. But when you put the moss, you want to make sure that it is another layer on top of what you already have. So you want to layer it over some of the rocks or some of the terracotta pots. You want to layer it around the plants though. So if you have smaller plants that need to go on top of this moss, then those you want to wait until the next final step. There's so many different kinds of moss out there. I find the more firm moss that likes to grab onto stone is easier to work with. It usually comes in bigger sheets as well. You can order big whole sheets of live moss online. I have not ordered any online, so I'm hesitant to offer resources, but I can give you some of the popular ones that I have found and been recommended. Keep in mind, I am not personally recommending them. I use moss from my yard. You can see how I've multi-layered, and now we're going to add a few more plants. I actually should have added this one in the previous step because it is a fairly bigger plant. This is what the caparatas are going to be kind of looking like as they mature. They get bigger and bushier. I wasn't sure if I was going to be using this plant, so that's why I didn't add it in, and it's totally okay to wait until now to be able to add it in. I think I'm going to tuck this little guy back here in between the peperomia mint and the peperomia elongata. I think the variegation is going to pop against the gray and the green here. It's a completely different texture. And I think it's going to add a little bit more bushiness and fullness to these two long plants. There's no wrong way to do any of this though. There's no right way to do any of this though. If your plants make it, great. If they don't, they don't. It happens. You can try again. Peperomia along with Fittonia and Begonia can just be added in without roots. They can just be added in as cuttings. If you want to see how I cut up my peperomia in order to be able to place them on top of this moss and organize them, I will have it in my next vlog for you. I actually chopped up one that I really didn't want to chop up, but it really needed it. But more about that later. These little guys I'm just kind of tucking in here. Amigo Marcello is a ground cover and a vining plant. I think it's going to be really cool to watch these grow over the rocks and the moss as they grow. Also note that there are multiple shades of green. Everybody always thinks there's just one shade of green. There's multiple shades of green, and when making a terrarium, you kind of want to take advantage of that. Making terrariums is a bit of an art process, and no two are ever going to be alike, not just because of the plants, but because of the artist behind everything. So keep that in mind when you're making it. There is no wrong way, there is no right way, there is just something that you will enjoy. After adding in the cuttings, it's time for the big reveal. It's the best part of building a terrarium other than watching it grow. Just viewing your hard work is absolutely amazing and appreciating every tiny detail. I am so excited with how this terrarium came out. I absolutely love it. All of the tiny little details, every little bit of moss, how you layered the multiple kinds of moss together. There's multiple greens, there's multiple textures, there's vining, there's bushing, there's trailing, there's climbing. It's just so awesome. I love every little aspect of it, and I am so thrilled. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And what kind of terrarium are you thinking of building? Did this inspire you to build anything in particular? And what was your favorite aspect that you want to continue on and explore further?
If you are an expert at building terrariums, this might be boring for you. You may not care. Like, I'm gonna be totally blunt, and that's okay. It may not be for you. But if you are new to terrariums and you're just starting out, then this might interest you, how to kind of layer and the different processes and the reasoning behind things. Also, I definitely want to recommend you check out Serpent Designs, Tanner over there, and Ben at Winchester Terrariums. Both of them are on YouTube and TikTok, I believe. Definitely check them out. Winchester Terrariums is also on Instagram, I think, too. They are both amazing, amazing creators. They have inspired me to test my limits and try new things, and I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do and be able to try these things out and have learned these methods if I hadn't followed them. So I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. Please go check them out. I will link them below. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. I will show you more of the placement in my terrarium in next Tuesday's video. My little munchkin has decided to bring up cookies, so I will take a cookie break. I will see you in the next one. Bye!